Thank you all for coming today to today's rendition of our Career Discovery Series. My name is Chelsea Lehman, and I'm Assistant Director for Alumni Engagement and Career Services. This event is sponsored by Career Services and the Professional Networks as an introduction to careers in biotech. So the professional networks were created to provide opportunities for alumni and parents to connect with students and interested in pursuing related careers, so hence this event. And throughout the series this summer, we'll highlight many different industries, and we encourage students to attend as many as they would like to, and you can find all of that information and scheduling on Handshake. So our plan today is to spend about 30 minutes talking with the alumni and then use the remaining 15 minutes or so for Q&A. If you would prefer to submit questions in the chat, if they kind of come to mind and you want to do that as we're talking, feel free to do that, and we'll get to those at about 3:30, just so we can make sure that Peter, Laynie, and Kelly get through what they want to share with you as well. So Peter, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Chelsea, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with Colgate students. We have three alumni to speak to you today about the life science industry, myself, Laynie, and Kelly, and we'll each introduce ourselves. We'll then go through a few questions that we've pre-prepared for ourselves that hopefully will give you some sense of what it's like to move into life science as a career path, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A, as Chelsea said. So I'll lead off. I'm Peter Covitz. I'm class of 1986. I was a biology major at Colgate. I took a couple of years after college to really figure out what I wanted to do and what my career path would be. And then once I landed on a decision that I wanted to head into a research-focused career, I decided to apply and go back to graduate school, which I did. And then after completing a fairly traditional biology PhD, my career has taken a number of different twists and turns along the way. I've moved into some adjacent areas, no longer doing bench research, and have had a lot of fun with it. And I currently am at Biogen, a large biotech in the Cambridge, Massachusetts area, and I'm responsible for medical research operations. And I can say a little bit more about what that is as we go through the panel. But at this point, I'd like to ask Kelly to introduce herself and say a little bit about what she does.
Great, thanks, Peter, and nice to meet you all virtually. I'm super excited to be here with you all today and connect with Colgate students. I was Colgate class of 2001, and I was a neuroscience major at that time. After Colgate, I went into consulting for a strategy and technology consulting firm, because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and it seemed like everyone around me was doing consulting, and I thought, well, if you don't really know what you want to do, at least you'll get to try a bunch of different things as a consultant. And so I did that with a focus in health and life sciences at the firm that I was at, and worked for a number of clients in the pharmaceutical and biotech space. I went back to grad school after 3 years and got my MBA from the Tuck School at Dartmouth, and then joined Pfizer in a rotational program, rotating through a number of different teams, mostly business development, commercial, and financial, and ultimately led a business development team within Pfizer focused in on oncology transactional work. After Pfizer, I left the East Coast and headed to the West Coast for a few years and joined Genetech, which is where I am now. I just finished my 10th year at Genetech. And I've led commercial teams, medical teams, marketing teams, sales teams, all within Genetech. It's a really special place to get to try on a lot of different hats and grow your skill base pretty functionally. And I'm now currently leading a team within our medical affairs organization, creating an entirely new business for the biotech company in the space of oncology big data. And so I'm building out several teams and a business associated with that in partnership with a number of companies in that space.
Thanks,
Laynie?
Kelly. And Laynie, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So thank you, Peter, and it's really fun to be here with Peter and Kelly and all of you Colgate students. I am not so far removed from Colgate. I graduated class of 2017. So my career path is not as long and accomplished as Peter and Kelly's. After Colgate, I went to the Johns Hopkins University and the National Institutes of Health Genetic Counseling Training Program. So I went straight from Colgate to that graduate program. I just completed that program back in January and then started a job as a genetic counselor at the University of Pennsylvania back in February. And then the pandemic hit. So now I am working as a remote genetic counselor for the University of Pennsylvania. I'm in the Department of Neurology. So I see patients clinically with either personal or family history of a specific type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia. It's an early onset type of dementia that causes changes in behavior and language before any memory loss. I also see patients with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or ALS and other neurologic indications. So I help people on the clinical side, and I also do a lot of research as part of my job, either providing genetic counseling services and testing under a research protocol, or also designing my own research projects and helping out with other genetic research going on at the lab. So that's me.
All right, thanks, Laynie. So for the first question, I'd like to maybe start with you, Laynie, and we'll ask each of the panel members to respond to this. What drew you to the life science sector, not just to a major at Colgate in the field, but what led you to continue and to pursue the path you did in this sort of area of the economy?
And I guess I should start by saying that when I was at Colgate, I was a neuroscience major, which I failed to mention before. And so when I was in the neuroscience field, I was sort of being pushed to either choose between an MD or a PhD, because those sort of felt like the two main paths. And I knew I really wanted to be in the space where I interfaced with patients, because I, just like Kelly, I'm sure will say, I spent too many hours in the basement of Olin with the rats. So I definitely knew I wanted to work with people, and I really was interested in something that had a tangible impact. I really liked research, but I didn't want to wait several years before I got results from something, and it sort of was less rewarding to me when I couldn't see milestones being reached as easily. And with the clinical life sciences, I knew I could be contributing to people's healthcare in a really meaningful way, where I could see results really quickly. And with genetic counseling, you can form relationships with people that last for a couple of sessions or a lifetime. I knew that I really enjoyed science, and I enjoy learning. So this is a field where you have to constantly keep up with the new information that's coming out. And so for me, it was a way to use the skills that I have in a way where I can connect with people and still push myself to do better. And as far as from an economic standpoint, this field is growing at a very fast rate. I knew that if I put in the time to go to graduate school, I would almost be guaranteed to get a job, because there is a shortage of genetic counselors. There's something like 600 job openings every year and 300 graduating genetic counselors every year. So nearly double the amount of job openings, and it's expected to grow 29% in the next few years. So if you haven't thought about genetic counseling yet, it might be one to consider.
Thanks, Laynie. So Kelly, what is it that you love about the life science industry? You've been with it for your career for some time now. What keeps you going, and why do you like this field that we all work in?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I always say to people, I just love my job, and I feel so lucky to be able to say that, because I know not everybody has the pleasure of doing that. And I grew up in a family where my dad loved what he did every day. And so it was really important to me to be able to achieve that type of passion in the work that I'm doing. But like Laynie said, I started my journey in the basement of Olin with a lot of rats and not a lot of people. And that just didn't feel right for my personality type. I was missing my friends and just felt like I wasn't really engaging with all of the things that were important to me at that time. So like Laynie said, I also sort of was having the discussion of should I go to get my PhD or MD, and how do I want to proceed from there? And I decided to kind of marry my interest in business with my interest in science. And as I said, start in the consulting world. But that didn't feel as rewarding as I'd hoped it might, because it felt really far from the patient. I was doing, more sort of strategic advisory work and not really shaping the development of medicines that could ultimately have real patient impact. So after my consulting work, I knew I wanted to go join an actual biotech or life sciences company. And I think that for me, much like Laynie, it's about the patient. I'm not hands-on with the patient. I'm much more arm's length and thinking about how do you impact really good research and development decisions in order to bring the best possible medicine to a patient and improve their therapeutic outcome. But it still is very much about the patient and the impact that you can have on patients' lives. The work that I'm doing now is super interesting because it's thinking about big data and how do you think about each of us as an individual person. And if you were to get cancer today, you wouldn't just have a broad type of cancer. What's very unique about your disease is the genomic makeup of your disease. And I'm spending a lot of time now aggregating big data to inform better personalized medicine decisions for each individual patient so that you can save patients from getting a therapy that might not actually work, and actually get them a targeted therapy that's designed to impact the genomic mutation of their particular disease. So for me, Peter, what really is energizing is the impact on patients, hearing from patients whose lives have been impacted by the therapies that Genetech makes, reaching another birthday, another holiday, another graduation. It sounds a little bit trite, but when you hear and speak and know those patients, it takes your breath away and it feels like really important work to be doing. And I think like many of us, I've been touched by cancer with my immediate family members, and to know that I'm working in a space to drive better outcomes for their healthcare and the healthcare of many families just feels like a meaningful and important activity. And so it's a nice blend of that along with my interest in business.
Thanks, Kelly. And yeah, I'll just comment that I've had a tremendous career in this sector as well, and I feel really privileged to have had the opportunities that I've had to explore different areas within life science and technology. I mean, I did start off as a PhD student after 2 years after Colgate, and did not really like rats much either, and that's why I focused on microbiology and molecular biology and genes and genomics and all that smaller stuff. You just don't really have much of a pang when your yeast die. It's really okay. But I did make the decision not to stay at the lab bench in a career path that would have taken me straight into a research management position that you would expect from someone who, say, became a professor at a research university. And I've done different things along the way. I've done bioinformatics. I've gotten into software systems that support life science and medicine. And then I've actually managed medical research programs like I'm doing now, where we're doing clinical trials and either testing new medicines or in the work I do at Biogen, we actually do research on medicines that are already on the market because, as you might know, once a product is approved, it doesn't mean you've learned everything there is to know about it. There's a lot of unanswered research questions about a drug or a disease area even after the product is approved. So that opens up a whole continuing area of research that really never ends. And that sort of endless fascination with discovering new things and as Kelly said, and then seeing the actual real world impact when things work out on patients is unbelievably rewarding. So I feel really fortunate to be in this sector because I get to pursue the things that I'm interested in, which involve, a mix of science and technology and medicine and business. I actually like working in the private sector, although I have also worked in the government. while at the same time, when things work out, you can really see the effect. And I'll just give you one example from Biogen. Biogen sells a drug called Spinraza, which treats a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which 4 years ago there was no treatment for, and in the most severe cases, and there is a range of severity, but in the most severe cases, a baby would start to show signs at about 3 months old by not progressing in their motor development. They'd not start to crawl. They'd not stand up when they were supposed to. The parents would take them into the doctor and say, hey, what's going on? The doctor would frown and show some concern and say, well, let's bring them back in a month. Let's see how he or she are doing. A month that's either no better or worse, they'll order a genetic test, which was available. And the diagnosis, if it came back as spinal muscular atrophy, meant that essentially in the most severe cases, that infant was going to be dead by 2 years old. There's nothing you could do for the baby. You sent them home, and the parents really were confronted with, one of the worst possible scenarios that anyone can confront as a parent. But, from 2017 onward, there's now a treatment option. And in many cases, it really changes the course of the disease. It becomes a survivable disease, and in some children, they actually can develop either near normal or normal motor function. And so, that's an entirely different scenario to encounter as a parent and a family. And, there's even increasing data that in some of the older SMA patients that survived into young childhood or adolescence, but were severely impacted by the muscular degeneration that goes with this disease, that some of them are seeing some improvement as well. So when you see that and meet families who have experienced this firsthand, there's no comparison. Getting out of bed and going to work in the morning is absolutely worth it. So I'm a big fan of the area that we work in. Okay, Laynie, you talked a little bit about how you went from Colgate into the genetic counseling field. Maybe you could just say a few more words about that. How did you go about considering the options? What kind of experience did you feel like you needed to have? I mean, what were really the steps you took to work your plan out?
Yeah, so genetic counseling is not the most well-known field. It was something that I didn't even know existed until the summer between my junior and senior year of college. I was doing a research internship at the University of Pennsylvania, which, small plug, was funded by Career Services Summer Funding. And while I was there, I was trying to see if, research was something I really wanted to pursue. I still had that PhD idea in the back of my mind. And I really, after about a week of looking at computer images of brain MRIs, I was like, I'm done with this. So I was just, while I was there, I really tried to take advantage of the resources that were at Penn beyond just my specific research project that I was working on. And I attended a conference that we host every year at Penn called the Caregiver Conference. It's for the loved ones of individuals with dementia. It's a conference that helps people find resources and ways to cope. And there was a genetic counselor there who spoke about her role in the patient care team and how she got to help families decide if they wanted to pursue genetic testing, explain what the results of testing meant for the individual who was tested and also the entire family. They helped people connect to support resources. They were the patient advocate, and they were the ones who helped people really cope with devastating sometimes or really rewarding news, depending on whether the results came back showing people were at risk or not at risk for developing these conditions. So, I had never come across the field, but instantly was really captivated by that and thought, wow, what a great way to use your scientific background and also your people skills in a way that can have a really meaningful impact on somebody's life. So I changed my entire senior year schedule. I took Orgo in my senior fall, which was as bad as that sounds. I took advanced genetics. I took all these other courses, and I started calling a bunch of genetic counselors and said, just tell me what you do. Tell me what's your specialty. What's a day like for you? in your typical workday, because as you might guess, there aren't any genetic counselors in Hamilton, New York, so I couldn't go and shadow anybody. So I would say that sort of the steps I took were making sure I had the coursework I needed. I called as many genetic counselors as I could to get exposed to the field. I got involved, if I wasn't already, in certain things on campus that would give me the right experiences I needed. So I don't know if this is still on campus now, but the Haven was just getting developed, so I got involved with them. I was involved in some advocacy groups, a breast cancer awareness coalition group, and I also was involved in some education groups, including like SAT tutoring and things like that. Any chance I got that I could practice skills in educating, in advocating, in counseling. And of course, I was already in the research side of things. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in that field to just start connecting with genetic counselors wherever you can, even if it's a simple phone call. And even if that phone call is to me, I'd be more than happy to take anyone's call. And just look for opportunities on campus that catch your eye in any of those sort of fields that I just mentioned.
Thanks, Laynie. So Kelly, you mentioned that early on you decided that research at the bench wasn't necessarily for you, and you took on a consulting role. Maybe could you say a little more about how you've kind of sorted through options? How have you learned about what opportunities were actually out there, and then what steps did you take to figure out what you might want to do next, whether it was right at the beginning or maybe not long after you left Colgate and had, after you had your first or second position?
Yeah, sure, Peter. I'd say also shout out to Career Services, who brought many of the consulting firms that I spoke with to campus. So I attended a lot of the informational sessions and listened to what each of the firms described as their practice focus. And then tried to engage with the leadership that was on campus from each of those firms to get a better understanding of what my personal connection might be with any of those individuals. And at the firm that I ultimately chose, it was because I really connected with one of the partners that had come on campus. He was focused in the life sciences sector and talking about the work that he was doing at a number of his clients. And I just felt like, these people they're super bright, they're really motivated, and the work that they're excited about the work that they're doing, and they're having real impact. And so it was really sort of the human connection of getting to know the people at the firms versus sort of looking at the website and reading a U.S. News and World Report on where, what is the top consulting firm to go to. And that relationship ultimately paid off in spades for me. When I graduated, it was right as we were going through a pretty severe recession. I think there were 13 offers given to my class year to join the consulting firm that I joined. I was the only one that started within 2 years of actually graduating, and everyone else got deferred or canceled. And the reason that I was able to start was because of my unique science background, neuroscience interests, and that relationship that I had built with that partner that made him feel like, I'm going to go to bat for Kelly to bring her on board and not defer her, because I can tell she's really passionate about the work that we're going to do together. So it was really forming that human connection, I think, that enabled me to not just get the offer, but then you almost had to get a whole nother job again and survive what was a tough economic situation. And that person served as a mentor for me for years after joining the firm. What I will say is that the path to getting to a biotech company like Genetech is not easy directly from the undergraduate degree. And so doing the consulting work allowed me to be physically on campus at biotech companies and see what all the different roles were and figure out what I liked and what I didn't like, and have a hall pass to really get to meet a lot of the leadership at those places without actually having gone directly to the organization right out of Colgate. And it became clear to me that getting an MBA was going to be my ticket to actually getting that office at the organization that I was seeking, and rather than just being a consultant and an advisor. So that was a little bit of my journey, and it was just more shadowing and relationship building and getting to know people and telling them about how excited you were about the work that they were doing. And like Laynie said, just picking up the phone and networking went a really long way to figuring out how might I get an opportunity at a biotech long term.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So I just wanted to add a few comments about some of the experiences I had at Colgate and some things I did after that I think have helped me along the way to be able to be somewhat flexible and move into new areas when my interests have branched out. And that is, you know, I know it's easy to become really focused on your classes, your grades, standardized tests, all that sort of intake and written output that you have to do when you're learning a lot and have to demonstrate what you've learned. But you know, when I was at Colgate, it was a very social place. I assume it still is. There were a lot of opportunities to interact with people from other majors. It was not just people in biology that I was talking to. I had friends and acquaintances from all the different departments on campus, and we talked a lot about a lot of different things. And that ability to just sort of move about a community of people that have different interests and are specializing in different areas, even as undergraduates, and yet still have conversations that are common between you, is a really great skill to develop while you're at college and even further to continue to develop after college. And the reason I say that is no matter what field you choose to go into, of course, if it's life science related, there's going to be a technical component to it. But if you really want to advance further in your chosen area, having communication skills, presentation skills, being comfortable talking to people that you don't know very well, at least on a professional level, those are things that will be just as helpful, actually. And I really feel like I benefited from the diversity of backgrounds of people at Colgate, at least academic backgrounds, and conversing with them. Actually being out and informally having conversations with them was great preparation. I did not spend all my time in the basement of Olin or in the library. You know, I got out and talked to people, and I'm glad I did, because I really think there's a career benefit to having done that as well. All right, I think we're pretty close to the 3:30 mark, Chelsea. What do you think? Should we move to a Q&A?
Sure. Does anyone have any questions for any panelists in particular or just in general?
Now's your chance to express what I just said a moment ago. Speak up. You're with people who you're not that familiar with, but you've heard some things about what they do. What would you do in a social situation like that? Maybe you'd ask them a question about something you heard them say that maybe you'd prompt them to say a little more about. Go ahead. Is it Syed? I see you raising a hand.
Yeah. Hi. I'm actually not a bio major. I guess most of the people here are. I did come into Colgate for bio, but ended up switching to comp sci and applied math. And I guess my question would be more towards Peter and Kelly. Right now I'm doing some stuff with like data science and modeling, which I like. And the thing is, I'm kind of unsure if I do want to go to like do a PhD and stuff like that. So I guess since Kelly, you said that your company and stuff was doing a lot of stuff with big data, and from what I know of the field, if you really want to do like cutting edge work, like PhD in like statistics and stuff like that, they kind of want that. And if you just want to do like data engineering and stuff like that, I guess bachelor's is kind of fine. So I just want to see like what you guys think, like how much like academic academic experience, or like do you guys prefer like working at a data science company and stuff like that for the stuff you guys do?
Yeah, I can take a crack at that. I think advanced degree in the data science space is probably helpful. but I don't know that you have to go immediately there, that it's also possible to take a year or two, like Peter did, to work in this space to better figure out exactly what it is that you want to do, so that you go get the degree that will actually be the most useful for the job that you want. And sometimes taking a year or two to, say, work at a venture firm out in the Bay Area that's doing a lot of this work, or interning and spending time kind of seeing big data analysis. The field is moving so quickly, and there's so much opportunity there that I think, I would say yes on the advanced degree, but maybe not necessarily right away. I think there's benefit to spending a year or two to figure out where you actually want to end up, because there's a lot of different paths there.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I would just say, I agree. It's good to take time before you commit to a graduate program. Work for a year or two, find out what people are actually doing who have degrees of different levels. And that'll give you a better picture rather than sort of an abstract notion that, you know, a higher degree is somehow better. I will say that people with advanced degrees do tend to have an easier time moving higher up into management positions later in their career. It maybe doesn't matter as much early. If you have the skills to do the analytics and the coding, then you have the skills. But if you want to move into a position a little bit later where you're actually, you know, really setting the agenda and setting the direction for how these bigger problems are approached from an analytical perspective, and maybe giving guidance to others who are doing it, who are now a little younger than you, there's where an advanced degree really starts to help out a little more. But I don't know that it's essential for when you're just getting started out of college to get some initial experience. I don't think it is.
Thanks a lot.
There's a question in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, from Kelsey. Would you say consulting might be a flooded market for recent grads? This is for Kelly.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm not maybe as intimately aware as sort of what's happening with consulting right now. I'd say consulting is always flooded, honestly, because it's sort of the default for, I don't know really what I want to do, so I'm going to go do this thing where I get to do a bunch of other things, and they're going to pay me to travel around and do different projects. In my experience, it was a very valuable first role for someone that really had no idea what business of biotech was. And so I got that exposure. And I don't think you have to be at a McKinsey to have the experience that you want to get in that space. And so, I think that's certainly an option, the top tier consulting firms, but going to a boutique consulting firm that specializes in life sciences, there are a number of those that might be less popular. You don't have to swim in the direction where everyone is going, to the Bain, the McKinsey, the BCG. You can look in another direction and get equally valuable experience at a smaller niche consulting firm that still does very interesting work and gets you that same level of experience.
Jacob, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so my question's mainly directed at Kelly, but I'll take any insight that you can get. So you were saying that you're working on like developing treatments in the oncology department, which is super interesting and something I think I might want to be involved in. I've done like a little bit of like lab research, like you said, like in the basement of Olin at Colgate. And like, I thought it was a valuable experience, but I can't like imagine doing that on like a day-to-day basis, but I do want to be involved in research and development of these kind of things. So I guess I would like ask, what do you do exactly on like a daily basis when you go to work? Yeah. And what are like the different options of different like roles you can have in this process of developing drugs?
Yeah, Jacob, it's a good question. Sometimes I feel like I'm a translator. I translate between the scientists and either the business people or the academic centers around what is possible in the space of oncology development and strategy. And if you ask a scientist, let's say, which of these molecules or compounds are you the most excited about? And like, we have to pick two, and they're like, they're all my babies, I can't possibly pick. And I help them think through, okay, well, we're gonna have to prioritize, and we're gonna use a framework and a criteria to figure out what are we actually going to advance and how are we going to do that in a way that best positions that therapeutic to be the next standard of care when it comes to the market? Or how might we partner with an academic institution to share some of the risk, but also share some of the upside and the value? So I take the really cool science, and I'm not the one to judge whether or not the science is cool. I have someone else do that for me. But when someone's like, yeah, this is a great one, then I help the scientists translate that to actually becoming a competitive molecule on the market, or bringing it to a partner so that they can help co-develop it and share the risk associated with it. So I think the training that I got at Colgate to speak the language around pharmacology and I still remember those classes and I still use it all the time. But then also, as Peter kind of mentioned, like the emphasis I remember on teamwork and being able to distill something down to its simplest notion is something that's a unique skill set that I find in the environment and allows me to translate between the two groups.
That question was tailored towards Kelly, but you're talking about your role as a translator, and I feel like I'm then the next step in that translator pipeline. The cancer genetic counselors will then distill the information of what is this clinical drug trial and what does this mean for you as a patient who might be eligible to join this trial. We sort of serve as a translators between the genetic and genomic information and the oncologist and the patient. So if you're interested in the drug development side, then of course that's all what Kelly was just saying. But then as far as then delivering it to the patient, genetic counselors have a really big role in helping people get into these trials and helping them make the decisions around what they want to do and what their families want to do.
Yeah, this whole translation concept is really important, actually. You're going to do better if you can see things from more than one perspective, and the different perspectives often are divided not so much by people having wildly different views of the world, but they do have different vocabularies, and people just sometimes don't have all the technical language or jargon in their heads to understand what someone with a technical background is saying. And vice versa. Sometimes people with a business background use certain financial terms that are unfamiliar to people with a science background. And so, again, the more you can interact with people who are having different experiences and using different words, even though they may be addressing kind of the same topic, like drug development or a disease, the more that you become kind of flexible with your own vocabulary and can understand more than one set of jargon, the more valuable that you're going to be, because you can then become that either translator or liaison or representative to the wider set of groups of people that are important, because life science is really an interconnected group of people who have different trainings. It's not just one deep, narrow field. E. Hawk.
Yeah, my name's Eric, and I just graduated with a degree in behavioral neuro, and I'm interested in consulting for the life science industry. And I was just wondering if any of you might have any other entry-level roles, like more directly for a biotech or pharmaceutical company that might be similar to consulting, or just a combination of business and science like that.
Yeah, Eric, it's a good question. Peter and I talked about this actually when we were preparing for this call. And one of the things that's been hardest for me about being at Genetech is that we don't have a lot of direct to Genetech from undergraduate institution roles. There's more internships, but there's not really a lot of full-time roles. There's, I think, sort of a tangential path forward occasionally through the sales organization, where if you spend some time getting some sales experience, then that's potentially an opportunity. But ultimately, I don't probably think that's the work that you're interested in doing. And so I have found that it's a difficult leap to make from undergrad into a place like Genentech or Pfizer, and that either having a business degree or some work experience that kind of allows you to demonstrate the value of your skills to the organization is probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, and one of the things that people can do is migrate from the science-centric role into something that's more business-oriented. But given your starting degree is a scientific degree, that's kind of your value proposition to start with. And so it is common for people to get a job as a research assistant after college, typically either in an academic center or possibly in a contract research organization that is hired by pharma companies to do research, but isn't necessarily a pharma company or a biotech company role per se. And use your scientific training to learn how, you know, professional research is done on a day-to-day basis, but use it at the same time as a way to get exposed to other roles and aspects of the industry and the business. And through those connections, you can then sometimes move into a more, you know, a project that's taking on more than just a scientific dimension to it, and possibly even get assigned to something that uses more than just your scientific background, and sort of migrate into the adjacent area that way. I think John raised his hand.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure this question will be directly applicable to anyone, but I initially came into Colgate thinking I was doing the pre-engineering for biomed, and I've sort of moved towards combining philosophy and bio. And one thing my parents have been mentioning is bioethics as a major position in all of these emerging biotech fields. And so I've gotten a lot of information about clinical ethicists, which I think are primarily based in hospitals. But I was just wondering if any of you had any interesting perspectives on bioethics, specifically in the more tech side of things, and how that plays into a role, and sort of what avenues might lead to a role like that.
So yeah, bioethics is important, and it's I would call it still an emerging field, to be honest with you. I think it's growing. I don't know how fast it's growing just yet, but I think it's increasingly recognized as a critical component, especially in this era of bringing new technologies to bear on some of these drug development problems. And so I would actually just coincidentally had a conversation with someone who's now head of bioethics at a large pharmaceutical company. They created the role actually for her. She had previously been consulting as a bioethicist, and so maybe a consulting type niche exists out there that would be a place to start. Because what she said was this company kept hiring consultants to take on particular problems that they were facing with particular programs. And then once they kind of weighed in with you know, appropriate opinion, you know, the project would be over and they'd leave. But the company was large enough that they realized these problems and questions just kept recurring. So they decided to create an in-house bioethics group and hire this person that had previously been consulting into it. So I would say it's a very intriguing niche that's probably going to become more and more relevant, but I don't think it's very well established yet as a major kind of pillar of a biotech company.
There's also a field called ELSI, the Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications. There's a lot of research. There's actually an ELSI branch within the National Human Genome Research Institute. So I would encourage you to Google that. It's the NHGRI. So I would completely agree with what Peter was saying, in that it's still definitely emerging, and the NIH is dedicating a lot of funds to ELSI research. We talk about this a lot in genetics. There's definitely a space for bioethics research around, you know, gene editing technologies like CRISPR and access to genetic medications. So like Peter was talking about Spinraza earlier, and it's a wonderful drug, and I've seen little babies who can now jump on trampolines when they never would have been able to stand, but there are also patients around the world who don't have access to it because it can be quite expensive depending on insurance and whatnot. So there are ethical issues around things like access to treatments, and also there are, you know, you mentioned you talked to some clinical bioethics people. You know, I call ethics consults sometimes when I come across challenging cases. For example, I had a patient who developed Huntington's disease, which is an autosomal dominant condition with onset around the 40s, 50s, where you have changes in movement, changes in your mood, changes in your memory. and it's a degenerative disease with no cure. This woman had donated eggs back when she was in her 20s before she knew that she had family history of Huntington's disease. She had testing, she tested positive, she developed disease. Do we contact the fertility center where her eggs were? Because other people could now have these eggs implanted and have kids at risk, 50% chance of developing Huntington's disease. So we called an ethics consult for that sort of situation, which isn't so much on the technology side, but it sort of is because it involves this assisted reproductive technology, but still is tied to the clinical side. So I think there's space even within the clinical bioethics realm to be involved in sort of these more technologic aspects as well.
This is Chelsea. I want to recognize that it is 3:46 and we asked our alums for 3:45. If they are willing to stay, I do see some more students have hands up. But if you do have to leave, please, we want to thank you very much for attending. If you want to step away, please do. And all of these lovely alumni are available on the Colgate link, and reach out to us in Career Services to find out how you can get on there. So Laynie and Peter and Kelly, are you willing to stay for a few more minutes? There's a couple other hands.
Sure.
Yes, I can stay a little longer.
Okay, I saw Cole has had his hand up quite a long time. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Thanks so much. So I was just wondering, Kelly, earlier you said getting an MBA was an important step for you to get to the type of position you wanted. And I was wondering, in biotech, but also in other technology-based industries, would you generally recommend trying to go in first in a technological role and then trying to work your way up and then getting an MBA when necessary? Or would you say in general, it's going to be required, work somewhere else, get experience, and then after you have already accomplished getting an MBA, then try to go for the type of position in a larger company or more prevalent company after?
Yeah, I think getting the experience before your MBA is absolutely critical, and getting that technical experience is also absolutely critical. You know, the world is evolving around MBAs, and I'm not sure where it's going to land in the next 5 to 10 years. It was table stakes when I was there to getting a position that I wanted at Pfizer or Genetech with requirements around advanced degree. But like if it were me now, I would go work for a couple of years and get a landscape of what is necessary, what advanced degree is necessary to get you where you want to go within a bigger organization. I wouldn't automatically presuppose that that's the solution today. It was the solution then. And I learned a lot of really valuable things at my MBA around translation of the science into business, which ultimately turned out to be a more unique skill set at some of the organizations that I've worked for. But it, you know, I think it's probably worth just seeing where the market goes on MBAs more broadly before committing to something like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
There was a question in the chat that builds off Cole's from Rebecca. Do you think that there has been a shift in what advanced degrees people are pursuing, MBA versus PhD, public health? And is there a variety of degrees held by the people you work with?
So there's definitely a variety of degrees held by the people I work with, you know, master's level, advanced level, PhD, MD. It's the full gamut. And it's really driven by what people feel like is going to enhance their path, whether it's an academic interest path, which is generally what's required if you're going to go into a PhD program. It's like, one thing I can tell you as someone who holds a PhD, don't do a PhD because you think it's necessary to get a job, right? It's not a credential type of degree. That's not what it's for. You should only pursue a PhD if you have a passion for discovery and research and in really pushing back the frontier of some field that you really want to be a true expert in. That's worth it. If you have that passion, then a PhD may be right for you, but that's the only reason it could be right for you, to be honest. Now, there's ancillary benefits after you've done it in terms of credibility in the research community and ability to take on maybe more senior positions in managing research programs. So there's certainly a career element to what it can provide, but that is not the reason to pursue a PhD. It has to start with a passion for discovery, for knowledge, for pushing back the frontier of the unknown.
Laura Leonard has her hand up.
Hi. So my question is kind of more about how you can break into this field. So it's mostly for Peter and Kelly. So I studied physics at Colgate and I graduated in 2019. And then I did a post-baccalaureate year at Penn and I was studying business operations. So it's kind of my goal to be in like a technical operations role in a biotech company, but I don't really know how to find like an entry-level position that's not consulting in this field. So do you have any strategies?
When you say operations role, like what do you have in mind? What does that mean to you?
So I think like short term, I'm looking for like a study manager type of role. I don't want to be a bench scientist, but I would like to kind of still be influencing the research aspect.
Yeah. So if you're interested in clinical research, there are study manager and clinical research assistant type roles in major medical centers that do clinical research, right? And I think at least some of them might be entry level for people with bachelor's degrees. And you know, they very much focus on coordination and some of the administrative aspects of running a clinical study. And you're part of a larger team in a department that handles many different elements of doing research on human beings. So that's a possibility. You know, again, as Kelly said, it's hard to imagine you doing that as an entry-level person right into a pharma company because, you know, quite frankly, we partner with people who handle those kinds of activities for us. And so the jobs are in the pharma company or the larger biotech are going to be for people who already have some of that experience under their belt.
Yeah, the other thing I might add, Peter, you would probably know this better than I, but also perhaps a contract research organization.
Mm-hmm.
That might also be another type of organization to get some of that experience.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that.
There is one more question in the chat from Madeline. Madeline is a rising senior and planning on using this summer to get a better idea on what to pursue. Circumstances are different this summer and wondering if you have any advice on how I can still gain experience and strengthen my resume despite the limitations we might be experiencing right now.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, some companies are maintaining their internship programs even in the face of COVID, but others have suspended them or cut back. And so it is harder, I'm sure. And you know, I guess I would say keep looking and seeking out either formal internships or maybe more informal ways to network and participate in events. There's, you know, in the Massachusetts area, there's quite a lot of biotech industry events that are often open to the public, and they've all moved online at this point. And a number of the major conferences have actually suspended registration fees or really reduced registration fees and moved their conference proceedings online. And so you may want to just try and join the community by participating in some of those online events and listening to speakers and asking questions and sort of working your way in that way. That's not necessarily as good as getting an actual position, but it at least will put you in touch with people and expose you to the goings on in the industry.
Yeah, I think looking within your local community, either on the clinical side, might also be an opportunity. My summer between my sophomore and junior year, I'm trying to remember when it was, I think, I saw a neurosurgeon in New York City who was my physician, and I just asked him if I could spend the summer with him in the OR, you know, watching brain surgeries. And well, obviously that's not feasible probably in the COVID environment. It's sort of like that type of, it wasn't a thing that existed. I just asked like, hey, would you mind if I did that with you for a month or two? And I'm wondering if there might be like various other types of opportunities where you can just ask, you know, call in a favor and ask based on relationships that you have, more on the clinical side, to just get some types of experience. I don't know, Laynie, how you feel about that.
Yeah, we still have genetic counseling students shadowing us, and sometimes people who are interested in the field will shadow. We have, even if the patient appointment is in person, we can bring an observer into the room using like Skype or whatever platform we use for the video visit. So people can either join into a remote visit remotely or join into an in-person visit remotely, so that even if you were worried about exposures, you can still observe. So definitely worth reaching out to clinicians. And even with research, like I'm split between clinic and research. In my research lab, every summer we get people who are interested in working on some sort of research project, and all it takes is a call to the PI, and they'll say, hey, here's one thing that you can help with a literature review for, or you can help analyze this data that we've already collected. So I definitely think, Kelly, your idea about just, you know, sort of calling in people that you might have connections with is well worth it. And I also agree with what Peter was saying about looking for online conferences and talks that you can go to. Everything in the genetic counseling field has been moved online, including our national conference. And there was even just the person who was asking about ethical stuff. There was an LC conference that was online, and the recordings are accessible for free. So these things are out there, and people are really open to virtual engagement. So even if it's a non-traditional internship, you might still be able to have tasks you can do beyond just even listening into these things by contacting people.
Thank you all so much. It looks like, I think we got everybody's questions.
Looks like Nick has a question, actually.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I had a question, I think particularly more for Peter. As of right now, I'm more a pre-med student right now, but I'm still juggling whether if I really want to do that. And being able to work on the frontier side of things and the bench science actually kind of fascinates me too. And I was wondering if I wanted to pursue that right after Colgate, is it necessary for me to particularly be focused on getting a PhD immediately, or could I work and then focus later to get that PhD?
I would encourage you to work, especially if you're still a little uncertain about pursuing a research path versus possibly going to medical school. That's how I was as a senior at Colgate. I actually wasn't sure which of those two potential paths might be for me. And I actually wasn't even familiar with some of these other alternatives that you've heard us talk about today. And so I was a bit uneasy about, you know, jumping in with both feet to either medical school or graduate school straight out of Colgate. And I'm really glad that I didn't, because it's a big commitment. I mean, for medical school, it's a particularly big financial commitment. And for a PhD program, it's a huge time commitment, and you know, it's a very long chunk of your life if you see it through. So I would encourage you to get a research assistant job first, ideally at a larger medical center that does research, because then you're going to get exposed to a wider variety of research, and including some research that's more clinically oriented will be going on at that center, even if that's not what you're working on. You'll meet people who do that kind of thing, and that it's going to give you a bigger perspective on what the different areas of research are, the different types, and you know what doctors do, what nurses do, what research assistants do, what PhD scientists do. You know, you'll have the whole community there, and it definitely should help you kind of crystallize and clarify your own thinking about what you want to pursue. And then you'd be in a much better and more confident position to apply to a graduate program or a medical program if that's ultimately what you do want to do. And you'll do so with you know, eyes wide open and with, I think, probably a lot of enthusiasm at that point.
I think we have everybody now. Can I ask James, if you're here, James Reed, if you're still here, to introduce yourself quick? Yes, there you are. Go ahead.
Thanks. I recognize so many of your names and faces, and it's great to see you all here. I am Assistant Director for Career Services at Colgate, where I'm a member of the Career Advising team. And as Courtney mentioned earlier, I focus on STEM and sustainability areas within advising. So I work with a lot of students around interest in broad STEM fields, including research, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, life sciences, but also engineering and non-research and technical roles within those industry areas as well. So I'd be more than happy to meet with any of you if you have questions about exploring career interest or research or preparing and pursuing for specific roles as well. So feel free to connect with Career Services and schedule an appointment to meet with me. I'd love to chat with you.
Courtney, do you want to jump intro just really quick?
Yes. So like James, I recognize a couple of you on this call, so I'm glad you're here and making some of these connections with these awesome alumni. But my name is Courtney Aldridge. I am a career advisor, just like James. I typically work with students more in the health and wellness field. And so those are very big, broad words that encompass a lot of different things. And so there's a lot of overlap with what James does, but I work with students who are very interested in research, but mostly on the clinical side and want to get into working with patients, but maybe not want to go to med school, like I know a couple of you are thinking about. But if you, something that was really focused on today in this session was networking and getting out there and talking to people to learn more. Chelsea mentioned the Colgate link. If any of you are interested in getting onto the Colgate link, getting access to that, I'm doing workshops all throughout the month of July on how to best position yourself on the Colgate link and how to find alumni to contact. And so those events are registered. You can register for those events on Handshake, just like you did here today. And hopefully we'll be able to connect on that and you'll get some of your more burning questions answered. And I'm always free to make an appointment with as well.
Thank you all so much. Laynie, Peter, and Kelly are also on the link, and we would encourage you students to reach out to them via that platform to continue the conversation. So thank you all so much for being here and talking with students today. And I hope you're all safe and healthy and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.